Hey everyone out there, my name is Joel Tippie and I am a professional book designer. My main focus is YA and middle grade, and I've been doing that for uh, more than 12 years at a publishing house, and a bit longer prior to that on a freelance basis. I have a love for books that I always wanted to expand beyond being a reader and a seller. And I got that opportunity after working with a few independent publishers and developing a real love for design. And didn't go to art school, and I'm self-taught as much as anybody can be self-taught when you're getting tips and guidance from great designers around you. I'm going to give you guys some tips now on some of the designs that were submitted. Now, Reedsy did put a call out for folks to submit, and I'm not sure how many were submitted, but I know that we culled it down to about 20 designs. So hopefully your design is in here. If it's not, then hopefully some of the areas I'm going to discuss are going to apply to your work as well. So it makes for a much snazzier presentation. So our first book here, I'll get it up as close as I can to the screen here, and eclipse my face a little bit, is a comic fantasy novella. And it must be because some of the stuff the author is describing in here are talking hedges, samurai ghosts, meddling psychotherapists, and ninjas. So I'm guessing they're going for something lighter, and I think that the designer on this did a good job of clean type. It's very readable. The fact that this is a science fiction novel, but has kind of the inverted kind of clean white background, to me says it's a lighter read than a lot of standard sci-fi, and I think that was a good choice. It's definitely identifiable as something that you would see in a science fiction section. Now, the issues I have with this, and I know that there are a lot of obstacles in designing books and finding the right kind of quintessential images for your covers. The central image to me is a little bit confusing, given the brief description I got from this, because this looks like a gardening adventure kind of gone awry to me, and it may have some significance in the story, though I'm not sure, and I'm not sure that a reader might pick up on that. But in the center there is a person who looks buried, buried in a hole dug in the dirt, which obviously looks comical, but it may not give a reader or a potential buyer insight into what's actually going on in the book. And again, like looking for, when you're designing on a budget and looking for stock, it can be tricky to find that right image. So I commiserate with that, though I would say you might need to dig a little deeper. There are so many elements on this cover that are working. And I think if there was something else, an object, a piece of the story that could be substituted for that image, you might give a little bit better of an idea of what's going on in the story. It could even be the central character in the book, and it could be a funny, somewhat quizzical character, in front of this kind of vortex or kind of space vortex thing, and that might work a little better in explaining your story. But otherwise, it's a pretty good effort, and I really do think that a lot of the elements in here are working and establish it well for the genre. And the only other thing I would say in terms of hierarchy on this, I don't know how much you need to push the comic fantasy novella thing and put it up at the top. It might need a little less prominence, but I do understand that you want people to know that it's funny. I'm going to be saying this a lot with when I'm going over these critiques. It's helpful to go look into the marketplace and see what other people are doing, which doesn't mean you're going to knock off another design, but it does mean that you get an idea of what's out there and what's working for certain things. And if you're a guy who's into, comic sci-fi stuff and you want to look at like Douglas Adams or look at Terry Pratchett, see what they have, see how they might be using, some simple elements to tell a story on the cover. But anyway, super effort on that. Next up, we have Emily's Choice by Bethany Swafford, and this is a romance, if you didn't guess that already. 18-year-old Emily Lawrence life takes on complications when Mr. Adrian Williams moves into the neighboring estate. I'm already kind of a bit titillated on this one and would want to pick it up. I haven't done much in the way of designing romance, but I would say in terms of a design, this is pretty, as we say in the business, in the pocket. It's a good image. The fact that the central character is turned from the viewer, for one, gives that character anonymity, which is an important, in my opinion, an important element in creating a bit of mystery. So I have no issue here with what our central image is. Do we want something that's more specific to the narrative? That would be up to the the author and the designer to decide. But it really it works. Now, in terms of the title branding, what I'm seeing here are a lot of things that we kind of want to avoid in design. Something called holes. You may have heard of holes. There are holes in this design. There's a panel there, which I know is there to aid kind of readability of the type, going over kind of a busy image. But underneath Emily and above Choice, you've got a lot of extra space. So this hasn't really been maximized. There's things to do here to this typography to close up those holes. You could actually have Emily's Choice centered, where they're right on top of each other, and then maybe tailor that panel a bit so it's not so there's not so much of that extra space. And then on the bottom here, we have our author's name, and first off, what needs to happen with that is this is kind of a central. This should really be a central design, so that the typographic elements should all be centered, in my opinion. The author's name is off here to the right or left, depending on if you know your rights or left, which I have trouble with. And so that should be centered. Secondly, there's a panel behind that. And I'm going to be bringing this up with about 10 or 15 of these things here. Take away the panel. I hate panels. I might start swearing. But they don't really serve a great purpose, especially with something that like a romance cover, which the thing that ties all kind of romance covers together is the elegance of the design, generally the script types and decoration, and a box panel doesn't really do much for me. And I understand sometimes people want their type to pop off, but there's other ways to do that with color. So I would just say ditch the panel, center that author name, work on that lockup up front. And again, look what other romance writers have done with their type, and let that inspire you a bit. Compare what you have with what's out there, because that's how we all learn this stuff. Okay, now we get into my domain again, which is the YA fantasy novel, and it's one of my favorite things to work on for me, because I generally channel my 14-year-old teenage self when I'm working on this stuff. And it's the kind of stuff that I really like to get hands-on with, and I often create a lot of this art myself. This title, Elemental Warriors, I'm going to read a little descriptive tag here. Ryan must master his new powers so he can stop the forces of evil from obtaining the powerful element orbs, which hold the very soul of the elements. The race for the world is on, which is a great and captivating little snippet there. What I like about this is that it's a smart design. Everything's readable on it. Everything's centered. It's bold, and you can definitely kind of make out what's going on. So it's competently done in that respect. So in general, there are a lot of things working for this cover as well. What I would say is that, hi Melissa, thanks for doing that. Hello, this is a comment. Okay, now I'm seeing comments again. Okay, first thing I would say about this is you've got, in terms of color, there's a little bit too much color going on here, and it's a little bit too much in the primary scheme. And generally when I'm working in YA, I mean, things can be colorful. It doesn't all have to be kind of, doesn't have to be monochromatic, but a limited color palette kind of ages things up a little bit. The second thing I would say is that the color itself is flat. You've got this big gold ring around it. This is a book about the elements, and what I would love to see with this is you bring some of that elemental vibe to it. Maybe that ring there is made out of a metallic substance or a gold with texture to it, and make it a little more dimensional and flesh it out. Like this whole thing has the workings of a cool iconic look, in the way that like Divergent had, and that was my baby. But it needs a little bit more fleshing out. It feels a little bit more like it's in a sketch stage right now. The only other thing I would say about it is in terms of type choice, you can add a little bit more character to this. It is, it's clean, but it doesn't have a lot of personality to it, and there are a lot of different ways that you can make your type feel a little bit more unique. And there are certainly other type choices out there, and there are plenty of sites if you're doing this on a budget where you can get type that's rights free, and find something interesting, maybe something you haven't seen out in the market before, and kind of brand it. I'm going to talk a bit about branding as we're going through these things, so things feel unique. Oh, and I also see that there's a panel on the bottom of this, a black panel. So ditch that panel, and maybe why don't we put that author's name in all caps? That would be another thing I would say. I'm still not scrolling, man. Okay, but again, positively, I really think it's a good start, and there's a lot of things going for it. This is Paranormal. This is vampire stuff. This is vampires that travel from New York to Prague and are fighting vampire hunters. And I think I think we're correct on that. Here are the things I want to say about this. I really like this illustration, and I don't want to be harsh with any of these designs, and it's not meant to be critical, but I'm not sure if it's right for the market, if this is indeed paranormal, and people may disagree with this, but not YA, but adult paranormal, is that this illustration feels a little more teen to me. Not a negative, and I think it's really well executed. And I also think that it sets up the kind of Prague, it feels very custom, and it sets up the Prague setting really well. But if I was looking at this with a group in one of our cover meetings, at Harper, my first question would be whether or not this is right for the age group. Second thing I would say is it's a very vertical design. There have been some issues with some of these in terms of the ratio. You know, some of these are not really book ratios. This one's a little too narrow. There are some standards out there for book sizing. Like a common teen standard is like 5.5 by 8 1/4, and things that, for whatever reason, work well in that ratio. So this one is a little bit narrow, and what heightens that sense is the type is not occupying the space as well. It's kind of conforming to that narrow feel. And again, this is one that could benefit from some unique type choices. You know, it's readable, and that's certainly an important thing. Believe it or not, like you can have the best custom type in the world and spend a lot of money on it, and if it doesn't read well on the image, then you've got trouble. But there are lots of ways to tweak normal type and make it your own. Like if you guys remember something like Twilight, the only thing that the designer did on that was like tweak the L in Twilight, like brought up the ascender on that, and it was a stock font. It was Zephyr, I think, and made it unique by playing around with the typeface itself. So that's one way, a cheap way to kind of make these things your own. And I'll say it again and again, but brand it. You know, make it feel unique. But other than that, I mean, I really love the art. I'd be interested to know who this artist is. And good solid effort on that. This one's pretty terrific. And I was excited to see this in there because it really does a lot of what it's supposed to do. This is a fantasy fairy tale book, and it even says the Shalom fairy tales on the front. And here's a little blurb. The Promised One is the first book of the Shalom fairy tale series, a fairy tale with the magic of stardust, the romance of Princess Bride, and the wonder of the Chronicles of Narnia. This is a guy who knows, a guy or gal, or guy who knows their marketing. Again, this is one that's very, very, feels very much of the market right now. You know, this is, I could see this easily on a bookshelf. The overall design is really good, and the sense of magic is really good. Again, like you guys looking, I mean, if you guys are looking at this on the screen, you may not be able to pull up, you know, as much detail. So I recommend taking a look at some of the other. Look at the images on screen, the way Reedsy is providing them. All right, so here's what I have to say about this. The type itself, I love. The Promised One looks great. The feather is really cool. The other elements, like the peach on the tree and the glow around that, this magic glow, and the wings, either butterflies or fairy wings, you know, however you want to interpret that, are great. The lockup is really good, meaning the type, the stacking of the type with that kind of series type at the top, all that stuff works really well. One thing that I don't dig, and it just needs to be improved upon, is the tree. The tree itself feels like it's not quite finished yet, because there's a certain execution to the feather you guys are seeing that's tight, and it's cool. It's illustrated and sketchy, and has a nice graphic quality to it. The tree itself could match that, I feel like, and you could get as intricate as you want with that, because you've already got the majority of your stuff cleanly on the front there. Your title reads really well. You could go nuts with those branches and really work on that tree design. And kids are loving the intricate, and adults are loving those intricate illustrated designs right now. So you could take this a little bit further, and I'd buy it. I'd buy it from you. And I think, now I guess there's one question here in terms of what the age range is. From my understanding, this is adult, though I could easily see it fitting in the YA, in the YA realm. I mean, some of the stuff could even fit in with middle grade. But that's the nice thing about some of these illustrated covers, is that they fit in a lot of different areas. But again, this is really solid. It just needs a little bit more work on that tree, and I think it'd be really cool. Dun dun dun. Dystopian, another area that I enjoy working on. A little snippet from here. The lifetime war has raged for centuries, leaving combatants on both sides of the conflict with no understanding of why they fight. Each side knows only to trust in the monocles they wear and the knowledge it provides. And this is a story basically where I guess there's two sides to a war, and the people are equipped with these monocles that they wear, which has been obviously applied to this character here, and that provides them with all the knowledge they need. And then two guys on the opposite sides of this wind up having to work together, which I think is a really awesome premise for a book. I find it like really interesting. If you guys have ever seen Enemy Mine from the 80s, I love those kind of stories. Now, so there's a lot of good things going for it. I feel like it establishes itself well in the genre. The palette is mostly right, I think, for this, and I'm sure that when they put this together, they said this is what our guy looks like, and this is editorially accurate, and that's great. For me, unfortunately, it does not give as much of a sense of like what the conflict is in this book. For one, this is a solo character, and from my understanding, the hook of this book is really about two sides coming together and like forgetting what they think they know. So I'm not sure if featuring one character like this would work. There could be a way to change up this image where you still had a central character, and then maybe in the background there's somebody else in the distance, and then you get the sense that there's more than this going on, and it's not man versus nature, which is what this feels like. It feels a little bit military and a little bit kind of man versus nature, and maybe there's something about that setting that could give a little bit more of a hint to the dystopia, because right now I'm not totally getting that from it. I also think that the color itself, though monotone is good, you could probably bring up some of the color in there and get some environment. I see someone else commented on that on here, and I kind of agree. This is looking a little bit black and white. And the one other thing I would say, it is a cool kind of distress type. It's not readable to me, and you might be able to make it out, and that's fine, but imagine you're looking online, which is what a lot of people are doing with these books, and you're looking at a thumbnail, and it's this size versus this size. This title's not going to pop as much to me, and unfortunately, in the digital age, when I'm designing books, I'm often having to think, well, this is great and beautiful, and it does everything for me, but what about that thumbnail? And it's a drag to have to think in those terms when you're a print designer. But a lot of people, aren't making a trip to the bookstore right now. They are shopping online. Sometimes, in this age, you're not always able to get to a bookstore because it's hard keeping them open. So think about that. Think about that readability on your titles. Also, let's see, Todd actually has a comment on here. There isn't as part of a series. Would you add that name of the series? Yeah, the funny thing about, I mean, you can go one way or the other with that kind of a thing. Traditionally, in my field of work, series titles are often for our middle grade stuff, and we don't. But there are lots of examples where we break that rule. I think if you want to let people know that it's part of a series, you can put that in there. It's a, you know, it certainly doesn't hurt anything. And in terms of the author branding on the bottom, it's tough when you got two authors, but you could bring that up in size a little bit. You could probably stack them and make that a little bit more prominent. And again, this is one where we have a ratio issue. This is wider than it is than a standard book cover should be. So again, take a look at the what's out in the market and measure those guys, you know, and you know, a 6:9 for an adult book is a pretty standard ratio. So that's going to help you. You know, you don't want your book looking like a when someone's looking online, looking like a picture book or something. You know, like a coffee table book. But again, a lot of good elements here, and it just needs a little bit more to let people know what it's about. But I think it's cool, and it's definitely my bag. Thank you. Okay. So now we've moved on to Running Toward Illumia, and this is a YA fantasy. And here's something you don't hear every day. Astrid would do just about anything to feel like she belongs, even hunt a unicorn to feed her starving tribe. And there's actually a tag on this, a reading line, we call it. She wants to feed her starving tribe, but a unicorn? And I don't know how unicorns taste, but I would imagine pretty good. So there are a few things we can talk about with this, and I'll start with the stuff that we kind of covered before. Though this type is readable at the bottom, and that's a good thing. Oh, no, well, I should say this looks cool, like this is right in the market. I want to kind of start with the positives here. It tells you exactly what you want to know, and someone's going to pick this up. You know, if they're looking for kind of a badass protagonist and they like unicorns. It's a great fantasy. It's a you know, it looks fantasy to me. It looks great. There are some readability issues here. For me, I would just take that Illumia and invert it, make it a bright color. I like the idea that you want to add a glow to it, but you could actually add a slight glow to that title and still have it, you know, a warm yellow or golden type. Another thing I would say, I'm a big fan of like nestling things. Like you've got Running Toward, and then you've got Illumia, and there's a lot of holes underneath Running Toward, like where the U and the M and the I and the A are, like little holes in the design. And if you did something with an all caps Illumia, where it was all sitting as a block, it would look a lot more pleasing to me. But you could still do that kind of black letter style, and it would still give that fantasy vibe. So just something to tighten up that lockup a little bit. And I would also say that the author name needs to read a little bit better up there. And in terms of the art itself, again, it's cool. This is an area I kind of know a lot about because I'm, aside from being a designer, I'm more of a photo illustrator. So I know the challenges of kind of taking separate images and putting them together. And this girl doesn't really blend in well with her environment. There's a cooler tone to the backdrop and a much warmer tone to our arrow girl here. And those need to be, it needs to be reconciled a bit. You want to be able to feel, you want her to pop forward, but you want to feel like they're in the same world. Someone's commenting that they're not making out the unicorn very well, and that may just be that this is this piece of art is a silhouetted, like basically a black silhouetted unicorn. There's plenty of stock out there of that kind of stuff too, if you want to like put a little bit of detail in there, because again, your readership digs unicorns, so maybe they want to see that. But other than that, I think like, you know, if there's a little bit more work done on this image and the lockup was a little bit tighter, that it's on the money. But just think about those things. Oh, and I should say, kudos for putting a reading line in there, because reading lines are important. Sometimes that's the best way to let people know what's going on in your book. It doesn't always have to be the image that does all the work, and you can give them a little idea, give them a little help that way. Okay, so this is Landfall. This is Sci-Fi. The ship fled a dying Earth to save the human race. Okay, so obviously this is firmly in sci-fi territory. I like the imagery. I think the imagery is slick. And if you look at this on not reflectively here on camera, you can really see the star fields, and it's beautiful. The branding itself, I think, is cool, and this is like a good example here. If you look at Landfall, of how you can take something that's basically a Gothic, kind of extended Gothic type, and give it character. You see the way those A's cut off and blend into the L's there. This is branded. It looks, to me, it looks a little bit more like a promo for a TV show, which, you know, a lot of books will do that. Make it feel like a movie poster, make it feel like TV. The branding as well. The only problem I have with this is that this looks more like an asteroid story to me, and it doesn't really tell us a lot about. It doesn't really tell me a lot about what I've read of the description. And the interesting thing is there's like a 15-year-old protagonist in this book, and that could be a really good thing to call out here. So maybe instead of doing this imagery, you're doing something that also includes your protagonist. But otherwise, I think like the design is pretty solid. But it needs you need to be a little bit more. You need to be able to tell a little bit more of the story with this. Okay, this is super sweet. This is middle grade, the Fountainbleu. It's about a young African-American girl growing up in Raleigh, North Carolina. The illustration itself, I think, is really sweet. It's very firmly middle grade. The sepia quality to it definitely puts it in the right era. The only issue I have with this is the typography on it. I feel like there's more that can be done with that, and I understand the inclination to make this type blue. This isn't enough color for me. This isn't enough color for middle grade. It is a general rule that kids like vibrancy in their things, and you can do that. Maybe this is crying out for a border treatment. Like you have this inset art, and then you have something colorful around it, and maybe that border art gives more clues about the setting of the story and the struggles of our central character here, and then just something maybe a little bit simpler and younger for the type, because this is kind of type for grown-ups, and you probably want something a little bit more approachable and soft for a kid. And again, look out at the market and see what other middle grade writers, especially the ones in this subject category, are doing with their type. That's the best way you can inform yourself, because I can't really give you real specifics on what you should be doing with that. But I really think this art is sweet, and I love it. Before Now. This is a YA book, and here's a little snippet. After months of testing and research, it is determined that the prince lived a previous life in Nashville, Tennessee, USA. And so this is kind of like I guess jumping back and forth in time from a British prince. It's kind of a neat idea. Going back to looks like Civil War times from the present. And here's the thing I thought that was nice about this is that the author had a totally self-deprecating comment in his thing about it being obvious that he had done this himself. And it does look like you did it yourself, but it also, here's what I'll say I'll say the positive thing about this is that you have a really good concept. Now, the execution of it, what this needs to be is illustrated. Like much of the YA marketplace, especially stuff that's probably going to be finding a girl readership. This kind of stuff's not gonna fly. It needs poppy color. It needs a whimsical illustration, and you can take this kind of iconic concept of splitting a modern day princess outfit with something from a certain time period and make it really fun. And you have the freedom in not using stock and working with an illustrator of putting some very story specific details in there. And then you get some really nice custom type, and it is and you're good to go. So I think it's a smart concept, and you should be proud of that. And then you give that to a designer and say, give me a quirky illustrated cover, and then you'd be all right. This is a fantasy book, if you can believe that. On the planet Dakarn, a battle of the dragons is fast approaching. Talk about a great reading line. That would be a perfect reading line for this book. Great imagery. And this is another one where I would beg the author to go out in the marketplace and look. And I think you probably already know that the type style that we have here is not right for fantasy. It's certainly readable, but there are things you gotta go out there and find some cool, epic dragon type. And again, you can go online and find some terrific free examples of fonts that fit right into that marketplace if you're doing this yourself. And then the other thing I would say is you got to work on that hierarchy too. Riga and the Dragonstones, that's your call out. That's the big thing you want to emphasize. And then maybe Merrick the Storyman is the subtitle on this. But this is looking a little bit more like a textbook, a class I'd want to take for sure. But you're going to need to brand this in a fantasy way, and you're probably going to have to scale the art down and make some room for type above that dragon. But it's cool imagery, and that's that's like a major plus. Now you just got to brand it right, and you're good. Okay, now we got woven, and this is a fantasy, and they've done a good job of illustrating that. For 30 years, Elaine has sat in her tower, fingers caught in an eternal dance, cursed to weave the tapestry of life on her loom. So that's a great idea. I think it's an evocative title. I'll just start off with the imagery here. So there's someone who's trapped in a tower. You're going to want to make that tower look imposing. Right now, the perspective on this it feels a little flat to me. And if you could take something like this art and give that tower a little bit more of a sense of scale, maybe you're looking from below up and looking up at it, make that a little bit foreboding. This one cries out for that tag, and I think given the description, you're good at writing evocative phrases, so use that to your advantage. The title itself, make that lighter. It's dark and it's barely readable, so you're going to want to invert that, and you can do all sorts of funky stuff to the type to illustrate that woven thing. But first, you just got to make it look a little bit readable. But again, it's like very firmly placed in the market. So it's definitely a good start. Now we have Turned. Humans have called us vampires, but we call ourselves the Turned. Another good reading line if you wanted to throw that in there. Okay, so it's a clean design, and it's a nice iconic design. However, for me, like, and this is the pitfall of kind of the iconic design in the marketplace is it does look big book, and when I say big book, it looks like something where, you know, the first print run was 100,000 copies, and that it's poised to sell, just based on its iconic lockup. But a lot of books that have gone that route don't tell enough of the story. You know, they look big enough, but ultimately you still want people to know what you're reading. And I feel like this is a vampire tale. I have to look really close to get that from it. And this might benefit from something of a little bit more of an environmental approach, meaning show some background, maybe show a character. If you don't want to go that route, I would invert this a little bit. I would make this a darker, you know, this white for me doesn't feel gothic enough, and I would go with a different color scheme. I do think it's clean, and you know, and it's not bad design. I just feel like, you know, you want to give yourself an opportunity to hook in a reader. You gotta let them know what it's about, and that can be done through mood. It can be done through like hitting them over the head with an image. But right now, I'm not getting exactly what I've been told this is about. This is Sky Girl, and this is YA sci-fi. 14-year-old Skylar's life drastically changes after she survives a nuclear explosion. She develops superpowers, which make her too dangerous to be around others. Now, the interesting thing about this, because there's a lot of things that are not working right now about this, is in the author's comments, she said that initially her idea was to have a close-up of an eye, the iris of an eye, and in that the reflection of the ruins of the city. And then she said, but then I did the character in front of the landscape. And I'm like, well, your first idea was a good one, and if you're a designer of any import, you've done a giant eyeball cover, and I've done a few. And the reason being is you can kind of get a lot from that. It's like maybe it's a little bit cliche, but it totally can be intriguing and draw a reader in. And then you have an opportunity to kind of like say that there's something mysterious and crazy going on in this world. And there's a lot going on in the description that you're just not seeing here. And the second thing I would say, obviously, is that this is the best example of a ratio gone awry, because it's definitely more like more CD shaped to me. So this would need to be put into the proper ratio for it to work. So there's a lot of things about that need to work. But I just want to say, like, if you have an instinct for something, try your best to kind of execute that that idea, because you know, like, I think the first impulse on this was probably the best one, and that would fit, you know, pretty well in the YA marketplace. But super cute, Sky Girl. Okay, so this is Sci-Fi. Alien Wind from the Stars. When late at night, an enormous alien spaceship lands silently and without lights in the midst of the opposing forces of a civil war, ... All right, this is cool imagery. But unfortunately, it doesn't say anything sci-fi to me. But I do like the image itself, because this is about a war and about the military. Without beating you over the head, you have this silhouette of a soldier, and you get a little peek at that gun without it being like too in your face. But you could do something very simple here. You could do something very simple here to make that leap into sci-fi, and this is going to sound super cheesy, but I've certainly resorted to it myself. But you could add something like a lens flare up from the top corner, or superimpose some kind of a ship. Do something interesting with the light or the color of this, of this star field, and give it like a little bit more of an otherworldly vibe. And then you can take that imagery and transform it into something else, and expand that, expand its narrative a little bit. And then I think, that we got another panel on here with the type in there, and I would say get rid of that for sure. And the type, though it's definitely recognizably sci-fi type. I think it could be developed more. Someone says glowing green horizon on this, and I think that's an excellent point. When I say somebody, I mean Kimberly. Thank you, Kimberly. Changing the palette up, skewing that color to get green is a good point. I should say that palette, the color palette of an image goes a long way to kind of like establishing something as a certain genre, like red for horror, and like blues and greens for paranormal, things like that. Definitely work. So those are the things that are at your disposal. Super funny, super cute, great art. The last of the naval navigators, covered in a swamp and raised by hillbillies, Jelly Bean, Gator bait scratcher, soon learns that he has the astounding ability to open portals to other worlds using his belly button. So this is really well executed art, and I love it. And the kid's even touching his belly button. I think it's really, really funny. And I would totally see this as a paper over board middle grade book. This is middle grade fantasy, by the way. So paper over board is like Big Nate and Wimpy Kid, like those kind of books that don't have a book jacket. I can totally imagine that in this market, and the art is perfect for that. So kudos to the artist on this. It's really funny and spectacular. I don't have a lot of comments except for I think that the branding could go further on this. I think that they could, for one, occupy that space up there a little bit more. So it's a little small. I like that you've worked in that kind of compass image into there, and that the center of the compass is in fact a navel. I think it could go further. I think the colors of that branding could maybe leave the beige behind, and personalize that type just a little bit more and make it bigger. And look at some stuff in the marketplace again, and see how your stuff matches up to that. But I think it's really cool. It almost looks like I mean, it could technically be a finished book. I mean, that art is really fantastic. Thank you. All right, so looks like we got about 2 more. So I almost made it through. This is an interesting one to me. This is YA science fiction, and the basic idea is a tragic accident leaves Jenny Tripper with the ability to see ghosts. Now she works for her aunt as a fortune teller and psychic, but she yearns to be something more. And I think there's like aliens involved in this as well. But the interesting thing about this cover is that the author, who I believe is also the illustrator on this, went for this illustrated kind of paper cut approach, and I want to say kudos to that. It's cool. It definitely draws you in. That keyhole shape is a very interesting thing. I love the paper cut approach. The things that I would tweak here, I would pull back on this art a little bit and give some room on the bottom here to put your author in. I don't really feel like the author belongs up in that keyhole. I'm not totally sure about some of the details in there, like what's behind the cloud right now. It's not super clear to me. So there are certain details in here that I think like need a little bit more clarification. You could even get like crazier with that cityscape on the bottom and design that up a little bit. And then I would say take that type and work that up a little bit more. This is like crying for like custom type. Right now it's feeling like a little bit out of the, I just think a lot of things can benefit from engaging a custom type artist or looking for some more unique unique type. But I think it's a really cool idea. I love this, the way this draws you in. I love the paper cut thing. It tells you there's like many layers to the book. And I've done a couple of things where I've kind of cut out paper or fake cut out paper, and it's always a cool idea. So loving it. Hopefully you got some good feedback on that one. I want to talk about a horror one really quick before. Mangle actually means mangrove in Spanish, but it does have a very sinister name. This is it's a novel in Spanish. It's a fantasy set in Spanish colonial era Puerto Rico, and the face on the cover is a carved wooden mask. And I think the art here is interesting. I think the idea here of having like a sinister carved wooden mask is really great. There's too much going on with this art right now. And I assume it's like set like kind of in a mangrove, and you've got all the branches around it. But I think this would really benefit from like stripping away all those branches, having a black cover with like this cool sinister mask. I think it's like would be a really neat idea. And then that type itself needs to be something else. It's not really reading as horror to me. And a lot of the horror type generally that I gravitate towards are like serifs that are very, very, or serif type, that's kind of has an angular pointy vibe to it, or kind of stuff that's like scratched or etched, like roughly scratched, scrawly kind of type. And I feel like that would work really well for this. And I know it doesn't mean mangle somebody, but I kind of wish it did. But it looks really cool, and I wish it wasn't in Spanish because I don't read Spanish. So we're going to do Northern Stars, because I also think this is a really sweet, competent illustration. This is a middle grade book. Describes a chartless march from York to London in 1839, seen through the eyes of two children, and the illustration itself is great. I love one of these illustrations that kind of pulls you in. It's got dimension to it. There's obvious soldiers marching in the front, and then a protagonist in the back. The problem with this title, or the problem with this book, is there's not enough color. This is middle grade. You can't do a black and white book. There might be a way to for one, maybe quickly colorize this artwork, because I feel like it's very competent work. And then maybe set that as an inset on something that looks a bit like an antique book. Like maybe it's set on kind of rough old board, like the way old books used to be, with an inset cover on an inset image on the front, and that would do something to this book that would make it more appealing to a middle grade reader, and still feel very historical, which this image does a lot. It's a good effort. Children in Nature, since I think we should just get this done. It's YA fantasy. On this night, Mira discovers that she has inherited her family's magical powers. She must gain knowledge and courage in order to fight the evil in the village and find her true destiny as a witch. Okay, so I'll start with the good stuff on this, which is the imagery that was chosen here, that I do believe was selected from a site that kind of specializes in book imagery. It sets a mood. I like the ghostly, foggy nature of it. So it goes a long way to push that fantasy vibe, and that tree there with the ivy on it. Really cool. All right, so this just needs to be branded better. The choice of type is not, it's just pretty standard stock type, and you want to have some fantasy type. You got to look at those books out in the market and do something unique with it. The readability on the type is really good, but only through the use of like excessive spritz, as I call it, behind it. putting these dark clouds of glow around something to make it read, which to me does not. It just looks, to me, not to be harsh, but it looks a little clumsy to do that kind of thing. Like, use color in your type to make it read. Like, try your best to avoid too much darkening around it. So I would say, look for some better, some better fonts. Explore. A reading line would be great on this, and also our ratio again is off. So look for something more 6:90 or 5.5 by 8.25 to make this look more like a book. But I feel like you're halfway there because you got a good image and a nice pose. Okay, Daughter of the Mara. This is YA fantasy. Torn between the world of humans and the realm of nightmares, Jay must work to control her power and achieve her destiny before forces darker than her own nightmares lock her away for good. And so this has got this insanity angle, which some books have. It's fantasy, and it's also, I think it's set partially in an asylum. And it is a great, it gives a great sense of that insanity. When you look at this one a little bit more closely online, you'll see these kind of inky clouds of color and this distressed figure. So it really does, the image is doing all the work here, and it's doing a great job. The only thing this one really needs is a better lockup. You got a teeny tiny author name up there. You need to be prouder of yourself and put your name down at the bottom a little bit larger. Author on the bottom centered. Make use of all this space up here. When I see small type, I think quiet book. And when I see bigger type, I think more of the genre stuff and stuff with a little bit more attitude. So you've got room. You've got a lot of real estate up there to kind of play with a brand for your book. But I really think actually this is a great start because of a really evocative image. And that is all I have to say about that. I think the ratio might be perfect on that. So thank you for the right ratio. That's all the books I have, and I made it through. You can take a look at my Reedsy thing. I should say that I do this for a living. So, if you've got some ideas and you want to run them by me for design, I'd be open to checking them out. And thank you so much, everybody, and have a pleasant Wednesday.